Imagine it. It's 112 BC. You're a soldier, not a general, not a king, just a man who woke up this morning in a tent in the Valley of Elah, put on his armor, and walked out into the sunlight, and looked up. In front of you is a 9-foot figure, 9 feet of brass and iron and contempt, standing between the two hillsides, shouting across the valley floor at you, at your king, at everything you've built your life around. And he's done this every single morning for 40 days. Nobody has moved. Not you, not the man next to you, not even Saul, the head and shoulders taller than any man in Israel, king, who was supposed to be exactly the kind of man who handles something like this. For 40 days, Israel has stood on that hillside and done absolutely nothing. And then, a teenager shows up with a delivery of bread and cheese. This is 1 Samuel chapter 17. You've heard this story before. Not like this. Subscribe or don't, but you won't find this again by accident. The Philistines have gathered their armies at Shochoh in the territory of Judah. They march southeast and pitch camp between Shochoh and Azekah, in a place the Bible calls Ephes Damim, which means, depending on who you ask, the boundary of blood. An appropriately grim name for what's about to happen. Saul and the men of Israel march out to meet them. They set up on a hill on one side of the valley. The Philistines take the hill on the other. And between them, the Valley of Elah. Oak Valley, that's what Elah means. A wide, flat corridor running east to west through the Shephelah, the foothills between the coastal plain and the Judean highlands. It's good territory for an army to maneuver in, wide enough to stage a battle, narrow enough to control. Both armies hold their ground on the high ridges, and the valley floor sits empty between them. This is the moment the Philistines have been building toward for years. They are not a disorganized raiding party. These are experienced soldiers who have been pushing east into Israelite territory for decades. They have iron. Israel mostly doesn't. They have military infrastructure Israel is still catching up to. And they are, from a purely tactical standpoint, the superior force. Saul knows this. His men know this. So when a champion walks out of the Philistine camp, steps down into the valley floor and starts shouting, the silence from the Israelite hillside makes a particular kind of sense. His name is Goliath. He's from Gath, one of the 5 major Philistine cities on the coastal plain, and the Bible gives his height with uncommon precision. 6 cubits and a span. A cubit is roughly 18 inches. A span is roughly 9. 6 cubits and 9 inches. 9 feet, 9 inches. There is some scholarly debate about this number. Older manuscripts read 4 cubits and a span, closer to 6.5 feet, which is still extraordinary. Either way, every ancient reader of this Bible understood one thing clearly. Goliath is built on a different scale than the men around him. He is not a normal human problem. And then, the armor. His helmet of brass. A coat of mail weighing 5,000 shekels of brass. That's roughly 125 pounds just in the body armor. Greaves of brass on his legs. A brass javelin slung between his shoulders. His spear shaft is as thick as a weaver's beam, and the iron head alone weighs 600 shekels, 15 pounds of iron on the end of a pole you could barely lift. And a shield-bearer walks ahead of him, because Goliath doesn't need to carry his own shield. Someone else does. This is a man who has spent his life being exactly this, a weapon of psychological warfare wearing a human body. He walks down into the valley, and he shouts. And the Bible records his words almost exactly. "Why have you come out to set your battle in array? Am I not a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he can fight me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you will serve us." This is called single combat. One man representing each army. The losing side surrenders without mass slaughter. It's an old arrangement, civilized almost in its logic. You send your best man, we send ours, and the gods sort it out. But Goliath knows something. He knows that no one in Saul's army is going to step forward. He knows the offer is a trap dressed up as mercy. The defiance in his words, "I defy the armies of Israel this day," is not strategic negotiation, it's contempt. And he comes back every morning, every evening, for 40 days. The Bible is spare about those 40 days. It doesn't tell us what those mornings felt like for the Israelite soldiers, but we can guess. The way silence accumulates, the way dread becomes familiar, the way you can stare at an impossible problem long enough that it starts to feel like a fixed fact of the universe. Saul's army saw the man and fled from him and were greatly afraid.
Now, David. He is the youngest of 8 sons of a man named Jesse of Bethlehem in the tribe of Judah. His 3 oldest brothers, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, have followed Saul to the battle. David has been going back and forth, sometimes at the camp with Saul, sometimes home in Bethlehem tending his father's sheep. That's his job. He's a shepherd. The overlooked youngest son who wasn't even called in from the field when the prophet Samuel came to anoint a king from Jesse's family. Samuel had to ask, "Is this all your sons?" And Jesse had to admit, "Oh, there's one more, the little one. He's with the sheep." That one, Samuel anointed. But nobody in this chapter seems to know that yet. Jesse calls David in from the field and hands him a care package, an ephah of roasted grain, 10 loaves of bread, 10 cuts of cheese. Take it to your brothers at the camp. See how they're doing. Bring back word. He's a delivery boy. That's all he is when this chapter opens. David rises early. He leaves the sheep with a keeper. He makes the trip, probably 8 or 9 miles through the hill country, and arrives at the camp just as the army is going out to its battle position, shouting the war cry. He leaves the food with the supply keeper, runs into the army, finds his brothers. And while he's standing there talking to them, Goliath comes out of the Philistine lines. Same words, same posture, same contempt. 40 days of the same thing. The Israelite soldiers see him and they scatter, and someone standing near David says the thing that's been said every morning for 40 days. "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely to defy Israel he has come. And the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel." David hears this and asks a question. Not, how do we retreat? Not, who is going to handle this? He asks, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?
Read that again. Everyone else in the camp has framed this as a military problem, an insurmountable one, apparently, given 40 days of inaction. David frames this as a theological problem, a personal offense. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? The word carries weight in the ancient world. It marks Goliath outside the covenant, outside the relationship between Israel and God. That he should defy the armies of the living God? David doesn't see a 9-foot military problem. He sees someone who has said something deeply personally wrong, and apparently nobody has done anything about it. His oldest brother Eliab hears him asking around and gets angry. The anger makes sense when you understand what Eliab is looking at. He was there the day Samuel passed over all of Jesse's sons and picked the little one who wasn't even at the table. And now that little one has shown up, not to fight because he's not a soldier, but to deliver cheese. And he's wandering around the camp asking questions that make everyone else look bad. Why did you come down here, and with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the naughtiness of your heart. You've come down just to watch the battle. David barely reacts. What have I done now? Is there not a cause? He turns away and starts asking someone else. Word gets to Saul. Saul sends for him. David walks in and says,
"Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine."
And Saul, the king, the warrior, the head and shoulders above everyone in Israel man who was supposed to be Israel's champion against exactly this kind of threat. Saul tells him, "You can't fight him. You're a boy. He's been a soldier since his youth." David does not leave. He tells Saul something. He says, "Your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and a lion came, and a bear came. Each one took a lamb from the flock. And I went after it, and struck it, and took the lamb from its mouth. And when it turned on me, I caught it by its jaw, and struck it, and killed it. Your servant has struck both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God." This is not bragging. This is a resume, a shepherd's resume, which is not the kind of thing a general takes seriously. But listen to the logic underneath it. The lion and the bear are not training exercises. A shepherd in ancient Judah who lost sheep to predators was personally responsible for the loss. It came out of his wages or his father's. Then he adds one sentence that explains everything. "The Lord, who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul looks at him for a moment, and then, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Saul dresses David in his own armor, his own bronze helmet, his own coat of mail, his sword strapped over the armor. The king's full military regalia on the shepherd boy's body. David tries to walk in it. He literally cannot move. He's never worn armor in his life. "I cannot go with these. I have not proved them." He takes it all off. He picks up his staff. He goes down to the brook in the valley, the same brook that runs along the valley floor between the two armies, and he chooses 5 smooth stones from the water, puts them in his shepherd's bag, sling in hand, and he walks toward Goliath. People have wondered for centuries about the 5 stones. Why 5? One shot is all it takes. Why the backup? Some say it's military prudence. The Bible doesn't explain. Maybe David just picked up 5 smooth stones from a brook, because that's what you do when you're a shepherd who has fought lions. You take what you can carry, and you trust what you know. The Philistine comes on, his shield-bearer ahead of him. And when he gets close enough to see who is coming out to meet him, he stops. The Bible says he disdained David, because David was young, ruddy, good-looking, a boy, and he came with a staff, no armor, no sword, a stick and a bag.
Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?
Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And then he curses David by his gods and tells him exactly what he's going to do with his body. David answers him, "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and take your head from you. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines to the birds of the air, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." Goliath moves towards David. David runs towards Goliath. He puts his hand in his bag, takes out a stone, loads the sling, and the stone sinks into Goliath's forehead. He falls on his face to the earth. David runs to him, stands over him, takes Goliath's own sword. David has no sword of his own, draws it from the sheath, and cuts off his head. The Philistines see their champion is dead, and they flee. Israel and Judah rise up with a shout and pursue them all the way to the gates of Ekron, bodies of Philistines falling along the road from Sha'araim to Gath to Ekron. The Israelites sweep back through the valley and ransack the Philistine camp. David carries Goliath's head to Jerusalem. He puts the giant's armor in his tent. After the battle, Saul calls for David. He's never really looked at the boy before, not carefully. The question he asks Abner, his commander, is almost embarrassing in hindsight. Whose son is this youth? And when David comes before Saul, still carrying Goliath's head, Saul asks him directly, "Whose son are you?"
I am the son of thy servant.
"I am the
Jesse,
son of your
the
servant,
Bethlehemite."
Jesse the Bethlehemite. Jesse's boy, the shepherd, the one with the sheep. The Philistines had framed this as a question of military superiority. They had the better army, the better iron, the better champion. He sees a man who has said something wrong about God, and he goes to correct it. The battle is the Lord's. That's his whole argument. Not, "I'm faster," not, "I'm smarter," not, "the physics of a sling projectile give me a range advantage." The battle is the Lord's. And if that's true, the size of the man standing in the valley doesn't change the outcome. It just changes how dramatic the outcome looks. And maybe that's what the Valley of Elah is really about. Not the stone, not the sling, not the physics. A whole nation has been paralyzed for 40 days, not because they lacked the ability to fight, but because they were measuring the problem wrong. They looked at Goliath and saw a military obstacle. David looked at Goliath as a theological one, a man who had made a claim about whose God was greater. And David knew the answer. He'd learned it out in the hills, in the dark, chasing lions away from sheep nobody important was watching. He'd proved it to himself the hard way, alone, before anyone was looking. And then he walked it out into the valley in front of everyone. One valley, one stone, one nation, freed from a 40-day standoff in a single afternoon by a boy who came to deliver bread and cheese and ended up delivering something else entirely. 1 Samuel chapter 17. The word of the Lord.